The ink was a faint gray ghost on her fingers, a constant reminder of her station. Beatrice Rowan ran the lending library in Bath, a position of quiet industry that kept her hands busy and her mind from wandering to the ruin that had brought her here. The smudge was from the ledger, where she meticulously recorded the comings and goings of novels and histories, a silent accounting of the town's fleeting passions. It was respectable work. It was solitary. It was a steep fall from the life of a sought-after governess for a viscountess' children. A bell chimed, and Lady Trowbridge swept in a galleon of silk and good intentions. Her smile was a practiced, kindly thing, and for Beatrice, it was the only one in this entire fashionable spa town that did not seem to carry a sliver of pity or suspicion. "Ah, my dear Beatrice," she began, her voice a warm ripple in the library. "Hush, working far too hard, as always. You must come to my musicale on Tuesday. All of Bath will be there." Beatrice offered a small, composed smile in return. "You are too kind, my lady. But the library requires my attention." It was the same gentle refusal she always gave to attend such an event would be to place herself under the microscope of a society that had already judged and dismissed her. They would see the former governess, the one dismissed without a reference, the subject of whispers and insinuations. They would not see a woman. They would see a cautionary tale on nonsense. "Ah," Lady Trowbridge insisted, her gloved hand patting Beatrice's. The leather was soft and expensive against Beatrice's ink-stained skin. You cannot hide in here forever. You have a good mind and a gentle heart. It is a crime they do not see it." The words were meant to be a balm, but they pricked at the carefully constructed wall around Beatrice's composure. A crime. The true crime, she thought with a flicker of her old, buried spirit, was that a boy's lie carried more weight than a woman's lifetime of integrity. A forward creature, unsuitable. The words of her former employer, Viscountess Eltrincham, returned, as they often did, sharp and unbidden. They were the stones that had built her prison. "I am quite content, Lady Trowbridge," Beatrice said, her voice even and mild. She was a master of this particular tone, a placid surface over a deep and turbulent sea. She straightened a stack of books, the simple physical act a way of grounding herself. A contentment is its own kind of success, is it not? A Lady Trowbridge sighed a soft, theatrical sound. "If you say so, my dear, but I worry. A woman of your quality should not be cataloguing other people's stories. She should be living her own." She selected a novel, her eyes scanning the room. "Oh, look! The hermit has emerged from his cave." Beatrice followed her gaze. Standing near the entrance, framed by the tall shelves of morocco-bound volumes, was a man who seemed to suck the very light and air from his surroundings. He was tall and severe, his dark coat cut with a precision that bespoke immense wealth and a total disregard for fashion. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, a study in granite, and his eyes, as they swept the room, missed nothing. He was Maxwell Vane, the Duke of Grimsby, a man spoken of in whispers, a figure of immense power and legendary coldness. He was a widower, they said, whose heart had been buried with his late wife years ago, leaving only a hollow, dutiful shell. He noticed the dust motes dancing in a stray sunbeam. He noticed the slight tremor in the hand of the young lady, pretending to read nearby. He noticed the weary slump in the shoulders of the elderly gentleman by the window. His perception was a physical force and unnerving, all-encompassing attention. And then, his gaze settled on Beatrice. It was not a glance. It was a deliberate act of focus. For a long, silent moment, the Duke of Grimsby simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. Beatrice felt the weight of it, a strange pressure in the quiet room. She had been stared at before, with curiosity, with pity, with contempt. This was different. This was assessment. It was as if he were reading the ledger of her life, not just the ink on her fingers. She met his gaze, her chin held at a level that was neither defiant nor deferential. She would not be cowed, and she would not perform. She was Beatrice Rowan, keeper of the lending library. That was all he needed to see. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod, a gesture so small she might have imagined it, and then turned his attention to a folio on ancient architecture. The moment was over. The air rushed back into the room. Good heavens! A Lady Trowbridge murmured, fanning herself lightly. He looked at you as if he were purchasing a prize mare. The man has no manners whatsoever. Beatrice did not reply. She felt a strange, unsettling tremor pass through her. It was not fear, it was not flattery. It was the unnerving sensation of having been truly seen, for the first time in a very long while, by a man no one else dared to look at. For the next week the Duke became a silent fixture in the library. He never spoke, merely sat in a shadowed alcove with a heavy tome, observing. Beatrice felt his presence like a change in the weather, a low-pressure system that settled over the hushed room. She went about her duties, her composure, a shield. She mended a torn page for a child, her fingers deft and patient. She quietly corrected a patronage misremembered quote from Pope, her knowledge worn lightly. She dealt with a peevish woman complaining about a late fee, her voice remaining low and calm, her logic unassailable, until the woman subsided, chastened but not humiliated. Through it all, she was aware of the Duke's eyes. He was not reading, he was watching. He was watching her steadiness. He was watching her quiet competence. He was watching the way she treated the errand boy with the same courtesy she afforded Lady Trowbridge. He was watching her, and she did not know why, and the not knowing was a thread of suspense that pulled tighter with each passing day. Then, on a crisp autumn afternoon, he approached the counter. The book he carried was a treatise on Roman aqueducts. He placed it before her, his large gloved hands resting on the worn mahogany. Miss Rowan, he said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of pleasantry. It was the sound of rock and winter. Your Grace, she replied, her own voice a quiet counterpoint. She reached for her ledger. Will ye be taking this one out? No, he said. He did not look at the book. He looked at her. Require a moment of your time in private. The request was not a request. It was a command, softened only by the thinnest veneer of civility. The few other patrons in the library fell silent, their ears straining. Beatrice felt a familiar heat rise in her cheeks, the flush of being made a spectacle. She closed the ledger. The library closes in 1 hour. Your Grace, I am available then. It was a risk, to make a duke wait. But she would not be summoned, like a servant, from her post. A flicker of something, a surprise, respect, crossed his face before it was shuttered again. Very well, he said. 1 hour. He turned and walked out, leaving a wake of silence and speculation behind him. Beatrice took a slow, steadying breath. The ink on her fingers suddenly felt less like a mark of her station, and more like armor. Whatever this was, she would meet it on her own terms. The hour passed in a state of suspended reality. Beatrice locked the door at precisely 5 o'clock, the click of the bolt echoing in the empty room. She turned to find him standing there, a dark silhouette against the fading light from the windows. He had not left. He had simply waited outside. Miss Rowan, he began, stepping forward into the gloom of the library. I will not waste your time with social niceties. I have a proposition for you on. Beatrice clasped her hands in front of her, a posture of quiet defense. A proposition. Your Grace, require a wife. He stated the words as blunt and unadorned as the man himself. The trustees of my estate meet at the end of the month. My late father's will contains a rather archaic clause. To assume full and unconditional control of the Grimsby holdings, I must be married. If I am not, control passes to a board of men I neither like nor trust. He paused, his gaze unwavering. It is a matter of business, Miss Rowan. A contract. Beatrice felt a cold, hollow space open inside her. This was it, then. The ultimate humiliation. He had watched her, assessed her, and concluded she was the perfect candidate for a sham marriage. A ruined woman desperate enough to be bought. A quiet, plain creature with no troublesome ambitions, no powerful family to interfere, a convenient solution to his problem. All her composure, all her quiet dignity had amounted to this. Her voice, when she found it, was laced with ice. "And you have chosen me, your grace, because you assume my circumstances make me amenable to such a transaction." I have chosen you," he corrected, his tone flat. Because you are the most honest person I have observed in this entire town. Because you do not flatter, you do not posture, and you do not crumble. I have chosen you because you have endured public disgrace with a quiet fortitude that my Thatharas trustees could not hope to comprehend, let alone emulate. The words were so unexpected they disarmed her. He had seen her not as ruined, but as strong. The distinction was everything. Still, the coldness of the offer remained. Your grace," she said, her voice shaking almost imperceptibly. "If you believe I am a woman in need of saving, you are mistaken. I do not need saving." He took a step closer, the space between them shrinking. The scent of winter air and old leather clung to him. His expression, for the first time, softened from granite into something more human. No," he said, his voice dropping to a low, confidential murmur that was more startling than any shout. Came to ask for help." The world tilted. The powerful, unassailable Duke of Grimsby, a man who commanded counties and fortunes, was asking her for help, not offering it. Asking for it. The inversion of power was so profound it left her breathless. For a full minute, the only sound in the dusty library was the frantic beat of her own heart. She had spent a year building walls, learning to be self-sufficient, the word for a horse that does not need to be fed. She had convinced herself that she needed no one, and now, the one man who seemed to understand that had come to her and confessed that he needed her. A strange, wild courage bloomed in the hollow space inside her. If she was to be his partner, then she would be a partner in truth, not just in name. Before I answer anything," she said, her voice clear and steady now, the tremor gone, you will tell me the truth. All of it. I do not bargain with half a story." His eyes widened slightly. He had expected compliance, or perhaps a tearful, grateful acceptance. He had not expected terms. And if I agree to this arrangement," she continued, pressing her advantage, there will be conditions." "My conditions?" He was silent for a long moment, studying her in the dimming light. He was the Duke of Grimsby. No one gave him conditions. But he was also Maxwell Vane, a man trapped by a dead father's machinations, a man who recognized integrity when he saw it because it was so glaringly absent in his own world. "Name them," he said, and so she did. In the deepening twilight of the lending library, surrounded by the silent stories of 1,000 other lives, Beatrice Rowan began to write her own. First," she began, her voice gaining strength with every word, "you will use your resources to discover the truth of my dismissal from Viscount Altrinchama's household. Not after we are wed. Before, I will not come to you as a disgraced woman seeking refuge. I will come as your equal, with my reputation restored." Maxwell's jaw tightened, but he nodded. It will be done a second," she went on, her gaze direct. This will be a partnership. I will not be a decorative ghost in your home, ignored until needed for a public appearance. I will have authority. The running of the household, the accounts, the staffa, they will be my domain. I am not a fool, your grace. I know how to manage a great house. It is what I was trained for." He had not expected this. He had expected to install her in his house like a piece of fine, quiet statuary. He was being offered a partner, a chatelaine. The idea was both unnerving and strangely appealing. His own household at Grimsby Hall ran with a cold, sterile precision, a reflection of his own guarded state. The thought of someone else taking the reins was a relief he hadn't known he craved, agreed. A third. She took a breath. This was the most important one. Your late wife, the Duchess. I will not attempt to replace her. Her memory will be honored. Her rooms will remain as she wished them. Her portrait will hang where it is. I will not enter your house and erase the woman who came before me. The staff will understand this. You will understand this. Affection will not be performed or forced. We will be partners in a contract. Honesty, respect, and discretion. That is what I will offer you, and that is what I will require in return. She finished, her heart pounding. She had laid her soul bare, not with pleas, but with demands. She had shown him her steel, her mind, her unshakable sense of her own worth. She had given him every reason to turn and walk away, to find a more pliable, more grateful candidate. Maxwell stood motionless, his dark form a pillar of shadow, the silence stretched, thick and heavy. He was looking at her not as a solution anymore, but as a woman. A formidable, intelligent, and deeply wounded woman who refused to be broken. The isolation that had been his constant companion for years felt, for a fleeting moment, less absolute. He was not alone in his fortress. Someone was standing at the gate, not demanding entry, but stating the terms of a mutual alliance. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently move a stray book on the counter back into alignment. It was a small, precise gesture. An act of order. Your conditions are acceptable. Miss Rowan, he said, his voice rough with an emotion she could not name. More than acceptable. They are wise. He finally looked up, and in the depths of his guarded eyes, she saw a flicker of something that looked like dawning respect. I believe you will be a formidable duchess. The journey to Grimsby Hall was a silent affair, conducted in the Duca's perfectly sprung, perfectly anonymous carriage. Beatrice sat opposite him, the countryside a blur of autumn golds and browns outside the window. He did not speak, lost in his own thoughts, and she did not press him. The bargain had been struck. The next chapter was beginning, and she felt a tremor of both apprehension and resolve. Grimsby Hall appeared at the end of a long, straight drive, a vast edifice of pale stone that seemed to command the landscape through sheer, unyielding presence. It was magnificent, imposing, and as cold as a mausoleum. There were no flowers in the urns that flanked the grand entrance, no welcoming smoke from the chimneys. The house seemed to be holding its breath. The staff were lined up in the great hall to meet her, a silent, black and white tableau of human beings. The housekeeper, a Mrs. Croft, was a thin, severe woman whose face seemed permanently pinched with disapproval. The butler Jennings was tall and spectral, his movements economical and silent. They looked at Beatrice with carefully veiled curiosity, their expressions giving nothing away. They were his people, loyal to the house and to the memory of the Duchess it had lost. Beatrice was an intruder, a necessary complication. This is Miss Rowan," the Duke announced to the assembly, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. She will be the new Duchess of Grimsby. You will afford her the same respect and obedience you afford me. Mrs. Croft, show her to the Sutherland suite." The Sutherland suite, not the Duchess's rooms. Her third condition, honored without comment. A small, significant victory. The rooms were beautiful, decorated in shades of pale blue and cream, but they felt unused, sterile. A fire had been lit in the hearth, but it gave off little warmth. It was a fire for appearance's sake, not for comfort. This, Beatrice realized, was the essence of Grimsby Hall. A perfect, cold facade with no heart. She was left alone. The silence of the house pressed in on her. It was not a peaceful silence. It was an empty one. The silence of grief left to fester. The silence of a man who had walled himself off from the world. She did not win them over. With charm. She did not try. She simply began to work. She had been given a domain. She started with the household accounts, which the Duke had delivered to her study without a word. The ledgers were immaculate, the columns of numbers precise, the handwriting, a perfect, sterile script. But as she dug deeper, Beatrice, with her librarian's eye for detail and order, began to see the flaws. The household was being overcharged by several local suppliers. Orders were redundant. There was waste hidden beneath a veneer of perfect accounting. It was a house running without a soul, without a practical hand to guide it. She did not confront Mrs. Croft. Instead, she started with small, quiet changes. She walked into the vast, silent kitchens, a place the late Duchess had reportedly never set foot in. The cook, a stout woman with wary eyes, watched her approach. The bread," Beatrice said, her voice calm and pleasant. "It is delivered from the village?" Yes, ma," the cook said, her tone defensive. "As was her Grace's preference." Beatrice said honestly. But I was wondering if you might not prefer to bake our own." The smell of baking bread, it makes a house feel like a home. "Don't you think?" The cook stared at her dumbfounded. It was such a small thing, so simple, but it was a question about preference, about comfort, not about efficiency. It was a human question. I suppose I could. She stammered. Edith's been years. I should like that very much, Beatrice said with a small smile and left. The next morning, the faint, warm, yeasty smell of baking bread drifted through the cold stone corridors of Grimsby Hall. It was the first breath the house had taken in years. She found a young housemaid, Mary, struggling to mend a tear in her apron, her fingers clumsy. Beatrice, remembering her own lean years, sat with her. She did not order her to work faster. She took a needle and thread and showed her a stronger, neater stitch. They sat in silence for a time. Two women, heads bent over a simple piece of mending. When they were done, Mary looked at Beatrice with eyes full of a new, dawning warmth. Thank you, Malam," she whispered. Beatrice simply nodded. She was not trying to win loyalty. She was simply being herself. Kind to those below her, practical, observant. She was letting the light in, one small crack at a time. Maxwell watched from a distance. He was a man accustomed to solitude, his days spent in the vast shadowed library of Grimsby, a room that had become his fortress and his prison. He had made a pragmatic bargain, a sensible solution to an irritating problem. He had acquired a duchess. He had not expected this. He had not expected the scent of bread. He had not expected to see his formidable, hawk-faced housekeeper, Mrs. Croft, actually listening to Beatrice's quiet suggestions about the household ordering, her expression, one of grudging respect. He had not expected to hear the faint sound of laughter from the servants' hall, a sound he had not heard since his wife, Eleanor, was alive. He found himself looking for her. He would be walking down a corridor and see her through an open doorway, head bent over the ledgers, a faint frown of concentration on her face. He would see her in the neglected winter garden, her hand resting on the cold glass of the conservatory, her expression thoughtful. She moved through his cold, perfect house, not like an intruder, but like a careful restorer, patiently dusting off the humanity of the place. One evening, he was in his study, wrestling with a letter from his solicitor. The news was not good. The estate's finances were more precarious than he had let on to Beatrice. His father had not just been a cold man, he had been a reckless one, and Maxwell was still untangling the debts. The deadline with the trustees was not just about control, it was about survival. He was so absorbed in his worry that he did not hear her enter. Your Grace." He looked up. Beatrice stood in the doorway, holding a cup of tea. She was not dressed for dinner in silks and jewels. She wore a simple dark wool dress, her hair neatly coiled. She looked less like a duchess-in-waiting and more like a scholar. I thought you might need this," she said, placing the cup on his desk. You have been in here since luncheon." He stared at the cup. No one brought him tea. The servants brought what was required at the appointed hour. This was an act of spontaneous consideration. An act of care, Thank you, Miss Rowan," he said, his voice hoarse. The suppliers from Tavistock," she said, her voice quiet, but firm. They have been overcharging the estate by nearly 20% for the last 3 years. The same goes for the grain merchant in the village. I have compared their prices with those from Exeter. We are being systematically cheated." He looked from the damning figures in his solicitor's letter to the woman standing before him. She had been in his house for 2 weeks, and she had already uncovered a rot he had been too distracted, too steeped in his own grief and duty, to notice. "How did you know?" he asked. "I pay attention to details," she said simply. "It is a skill one acquires when one's survival depends upon it." There it was again. That quiet, unbending strength. He had hired a duchess. He had found an ally. A general for his besieged fortress. He began, but the words failed him. He, a duke, a man of immense power and command, did not know how to say what he felt. He did not know how to articulate the profound, unsettling relief that was washing over him. She seemed to understand. "We will deal with it, Your Grace," she said, her tone calm and reassuring. Together." That was the agreement. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. You should not spend all your time in here," she said softly. There is a moon tonight, a hunter's moon. It would be a shame to miss it." And she was gone, leaving him alone with his cooling tea, the scent of her faint lavender perfume, and the startling realization that the bargain he had made was changing him. He was no longer just a duke discharging a duty. He was a man in a cold, dark house, and someone had just opened a window. The thaw was not a sudden event. It was a slow, almost imperceptible shift, like a glacier receding inch by painstaking inch. It was in the way Mrs. Croft began to consult Beatrice on the menus, her severe expression softening into something approaching collaboration. It was in the way Jennings, the spectral butler, would now hold a door open for her with a faint ghost of a smile. It was in the warmth that now seemed to emanate from the kitchens, a warmth that had nothing to do with the ovens. Beatrice discovered the heart of Maxwell's isolation by accident. Exploring the upper floors of the vast house, she found a locked door at the end of a dusty, unused corridor. A faint line of light showed beneath it. Curiosity piqued, she asked Mary, the young housemaid, about it. "Oh, that is the old observatory, Maham," Mary whispered, as if the room itself were a secret. His Grace, his father, the old duke, he had it built. But no one up there in years, not sin," her voice trailed off. Not since the late Duchess passed," Beatrice finished softly. Mary nodded, her eyes wide. "He locks himself away, Malam. The master. He used to spend hours up there with her. They'd look at the stars. After she was gone, he locked the door and never went back. A man who looked at the stars." This cold, severe duke, who seemed so utterly grounded in the hard realities of finance and duty, had a secret passion for the heavens. It was a detail so personal, so vulnerable, it made Beatrice's heart ache. She did not ask for the key. She did not want to force his grief into the open. Instead, she found another way. Jennings, it turned out, held a master key to every lock in the house. It took her a week of quiet conversation, of earning his trust, before she dared to ask. She did not explain why. She simply asked for the key to the observatory, a toe, see if it requires cleaning. The old butler looked at her for a long, considering moment. He saw not a usurper, but a woman of quiet purpose and deep kindness. He saw the way the house was slowly coming back to life under her care. He gave a single, slow nod and retrieved the heavy iron key from a locked box in his pantry. The observatory was a circular room at the top of a winding stone staircase, its domed ceiling holding a large, brass and steel telescope pointed at the silent sky. The room was thick with dust. A fine gray powder coated every surface, a shroud of neglect. The air was stale, cold, and sad. It was a tomb for a shared joy. Beatrice did not disturb the telescope. She did not touch his charts or his books. With Marius' help, she spent the better part of a day cleaning. They swept the floors, polished the wood, and washed the tall arched windows until the afternoon sun streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She did not try to change the room. She just let the light and air back into it. She opened the heavy velvet curtains that had been drawn for years. When she was done, she locked the door and returned the key to Jennings, saying nothing. 2 nights later, unable to sleep, Beatrice wandered the silent corridors. A sliver of light from the end of the upper hall drew her forward. It was the door to the observatory. It was ajar. Her heart pounding, she pushed it open. Maxwell was standing by the great telescope, his back to her. The dome was open to the night sky, a breathtaking sweep of glittering stars. He was not looking through the lens. He was just standing there, breathing in the cold, clean night air. He must have heard her, but he did not turn a Cassiopeia, he said, his voice low and rough. Am I why, Eleonora? She said it looked like a queen, carelessly lounging on her throne. Beatrice remained in the doorway, giving him his space. And what do you see? Your Grace? He was silent for a long time. I see the initial of the man who built my prison, he said, his voice bitter. Ah, my father. Vain. He finally turned to face her. In the faint starlight, his face was a landscape of sorrow, he despised, anything he could not control. Feelings, the stars. He built this place to prove he could map and master, even the heavens. A liability. That a duca's heart was a risk the estate could not afford. He was wrong, Beatrice said softly. Was he? Maxwell's laugh was a harsh, broken sound. I loved my wife, and when I lost her, this house, this estate, it all nearly crumbled. He was right. It was a risk, so I locked it all away. Her rooms, this place. My heart. He looked around the clean, peaceful room. You opened the curtains. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. An acknowledgement. A room needs to breathe. As she said simply, I have not been able to breathe in this house for 5 years. Miss Rowan, he confessed, his voice barely a whisper, until you came. He took a step towards her. The bargain I made, I told you it was a matter of business. That was not the entire truth. My father's debts were more extensive than I knew. The trustees are not just a nuisance. They are vultures. If they gain control, they will dismantle Grimsby, sell off the lands, the tenants be damned. This marriage is not just about my control. It is about the survival of everything my family has built for 300 years. It is about hundreds of people whose livelihoods depend on this estate. The weight of his confession settled between them. She finally understood the true depth of his desperation, the crushing burden of his duty. He was not just a cold man protecting his inheritance. He was a king, trying to save his kingdom, armed with nothing but a dead father's bad reputation and a ticking clock. Then we must not fail, she said, her voice filled with a fierce resolve that surprised them both. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, the walls he had built so carefully around himself began to crack. He saw, not Miss Rowan, the convenient solution, but Beatrice, the woman who had walked into his mausoleum and patiently, quietly reminded it what it was to be a home. He saw the woman who had faced her own ruin with courage and was now offering to stand with him as he faced his. He had thought he was lonely. He had not understood the true meaning of the word until this moment, when he felt the first, terrifying glimmer of its opposite. I find myself relying on your judgment, Beatrice, he said. The use of her first name, a quiet intimacy that hung in the starlit air. About everything, that was the agreement. Maxwell, she replied, testing his name on her tongue. It felt right. He had made a bargain to save his estate. He was beginning to realize he had done it to save himself. And the thought was the most terrifying and the most hopeful thing he had felt in years. The summons came in a cream-colored envelope, sealed with an ostentatious wax crest. They were invited commanded, was the more accurate termito, a grand ball at the Duke of Abernathy's residence in Bath. It was a necessary step. To quell the rumors and satisfy the prying eyes of the ton, Maxwell and Beatrice had to be seen together, to present a united front before the official announcement of their engagement. I detest these things, a Maxwell said, tossing the invitation onto his desk as if it were contaminated. We must go. Beatrice replied calmly. She was standing by the window of the morning room, a space she had claimed and filled with pots of late-blooming chrysanthemums. Sunlight, a once rare commodity in Grimsby Hall, now streamed into the house. A society requires its rituals. It will be an ordeal, but a necessary one. He looked at her, admiring the quiet steel in her spine. She was not afraid. Or, if she was, she did not show it. You are right, of course, he conceded. He found himself agreeing with her more and more. Her logic was a calming balm to his own turbulent thoughts. A Lady Trowbridge will be there. She will be a friendly face for you, at least. Beatrice smiled, a rare, genuine smile that lit up her features. Yes, her letters have been so full of delight for me. She has been my only true friend in Bath. It will be good to see her at the night of the ball arrived. Cold and clear, Beatrice stood before the mirror in her chambers, gowned in a deep sapphire silk that Maxwell had insisted his own London dressmaker create for her. It was a dress of breathtaking simplicity and elegance, a statement of quiet confidence rather than flashy display. It made her eyes seem darker, her skin luminous. For the first time since her dismissal, she felt not like a governess or a librarian, but like herself, a woman on the cusp of a new life. Maxwell was waiting for her at the bottom of the grand staircase. When he saw her, he stopped dead. He had only ever seen her in practical wool or sober cotton. The sight of her in shimmering silk, her dark hair upswept to reveal the graceful line of her neck, was a physical blow. He had chosen her for her mind, for her integrity, for her fortitude. He had not allowed himself to acknowledge that she was also beautiful. Beatrice, he said, his voice thick. You look acceptable, I hope. She finished for him, a hint of her dry wit surfacing. You look magnificent, he corrected, his gaze intense. He offered his arm, his touch firm and steady on hers. As they walked towards the carriage, he leaned in, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. Stay close to me tonight. These people, they feed on weakness. I am not weak, Maxwell, she reminded him gently. No, he said. That is what makes you a target. The ballroom was a dazzling, overwhelming assault on the senses. Hundreds of candles glittered in the chandeliers, their light fracturing off diamonds and jewels. The air was thick with perfume and the buzz of 100 conversations. Beatrice felt a familiar tightening in her stomach, the old instinct to retreat, to become invisible. But then, she felt the steady pressure of Maxwell's hand on her arm, a silent anchor in the glittering sea. Lady Trowbridge found them almost immediately, her face a mask of effusive delight. Beatrice, my dear, and your grace, you make a truly splendid couple. I am so thrilled, I could burst. As she enveloped Beatrice in a cloud of lavender and silk, I knew you were destined for greater things than that dusty old library. Beatrice felt a surge of genuine affection. Thank you, my lady. Your friendship has meant the world to me. Think nothing of it, Lady Trowbridge said, her eyes twinkling. But as she looked past Beatrice to Maxwell, her smile seemed to tighten at the edges. Your Grace, you have found a true diamond. So rare to find a woman of such a simple virtues these days. The compliment felt strangely double-edged, but Beatrice dismissed it. Lady Trowbridge meant well. She always did. They danced. Maxwell was a surprisingly graceful dancer, his movements precise and controlled. As he held her, navigating the currents of the waltz, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. For those few minutes, they were simply a man and a woman, moving as one to the music. There was no bargain, no trustees, no debt. There was only the solid strength of his hand on her back, and the intense, unreadable expression in his dark eyes. But the world could not be held at bay for long. As the dance ended, a hush began to spread from the far side of the ballroom. Conversations faltered, heads turned, a path was clearing, and walking down it were Viscount and Viscountess Altrincham, her former employers. And with them was their son, Thomas, a handsome, spoiled young man, whose charming smile had always hidden a core of casual cruelty. Beatrice froze, the blood drained from her face. It was him, the source of her ruin, a forward creature. Unsuitable. The words screamed in her mind. Maxwell felt her stiffen, saw the color leave her cheeks. His hand tightened on hers. Beatrice, it's them," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Before Maxwell could react, before he could steer her away, it was too late. Lady Trowbridge, who had been chatting animatedly nearby, stepped forward, her hand raised for silence. My dears," she called out, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "What a marvelous coincidence. Viscountess Altrincham, you simply must be introduced to my dear friend, Miss Rowan. She is newly come to Grimsby, you know, such a small world." It was a trap. The realization hit Beatrice with the force of a physical blow. The friendly smile, the effusive praise, the engineered, a chance meeting. It was all a lie. Lady Trowbridge, her only friend, had orchestrated this. Viscountess Altrincham's eyes widened in feigned surprise, her face a mask of cold displeasure. A Miss Rowan? Surely not. The governess. Thomas stepped forward, a smirk playing on his lips. He looked Beatrice up and down, his gaze lingering on the fine silk of her gown. Well, he said, his voice loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. You have certainly landed on your feet, haven't you? I trust your new protector is accommodating of your ambitions." The insinuation was vile, unmistakable. A collective gasp went through the assembled crowd. Beatrice felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. This was her nightmare, played out on the grandest possible stage. She was being stripped bare, her name and dignity shredded before the entire world. She felt Maxwell's entire body go rigid with fury beside her. Sir," Maxwell began, his voice a low, dangerous growl. You will apologize to the lady at once." Thomas laughed, emboldened by his audience. "Apologize for what?" For speaking the truth, the woman was dismissed for improper conduct. She made advances toward me. My mother had to send her packing without a reference to protect my reputation of the lie, so much more poisonous when spoken aloud in this glittering room, struck Beatrice dumb. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, judging her, condemning her. The whispers started, a sibilant tide of scandal. It was Lady Trowbridge who delivered the final, devastating blow. She placed a comforting hand on the Viscountess's arm, her expression one of deep, sorrowful concern. "Oh, my dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I had no idea. I am so terribly sorry. I seem to have brought a viper into our midst." "Your Grace," she said, turning to Maxwell, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. You have been deceived. This woman is a fortune hunter of the worst kind. The trap was sprung." The public humiliation was complete. Beatrice stood frozen, shattered, the beautiful sapphire gown feeling like a costume for a fool. She had been so careful. She had built her walls so high. This kind, smiling, treacherous woman, in the ensuing chaos, as the whispers grew to a roar, Maxwell moved. He did not argue. He did not defend. He simply acted. He unwrapped his arm from hers, only to shrug off his own dark evening coat and wrap it around her shoulders, shielding her from the prying eyes. It was an act of shocking intimacy, a public claiming that defied all convention. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear, his voice a raw, desperate promise against the cacophony of the crowd. Uh, uh, this does not change anything, said, his voice ragged with a fury she had never heard. I will not lose you. It was not a declaration of love. It was something far more primal, a statement of possession, a vow of alliance in the face of a common enemy. It was a pressured, desperate half-confession, torn from him in the heat of battle. And in that moment, beneath the weight of her shame and betrayal, Beatrice felt a tiny, fierce spark of hope ignite. He believed her. In the face of all this, he believed her. He took her hand, his grip like iron, and began to lead her from the floor. But they did not flee. He steered her not towards the exit, but towards the card room, his face a mask of cold, controlled rage. The reckoning was not over. It had just begun. The card room was an oasis of quiet mahogany and leather, but Maxwell's entrance turned it into a tribunal. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The sheer force of his presence was enough to command the room. He addressed the Duke of Abernethy, their host, his voice like chipping ice. Your Grace, I require the use of this room for a private matter. And I require the presence of Viscount and Viscountess Altrincham, their son, and Lady Trowbridge. Now, it was not a request. Dukes did not request. They commanded. Abernethy, his face pale, immediately dispatched servants to fetch the required parties. The crowd in the ballroom parted before Maxwell like the Red Sea, their whispers following him. Beatrice stood beside him, the heavy weight of his coat still around her shoulders, a tangible shield. She was terrified, but she was not broken. She drew strength from his fury, from his unwavering belief in her. The chosen five were ushered into the room, the door closing behind them with a heavy thud, shutting out the rest of the world. Lady Trowbridge looked triumphant, the Viscountess indignant, the Viscount flustered, and Thomas smug. Maxwell gestured for Beatrice to sit in one of the plush leather chairs. He remained standing, a towering figure of judgment. Thomas Altrincham, he began, his voice dangerously soft. You have made a grave accusation against Miss Rowan. You claim she made improper advances toward you. The truth. Thomas blustered, though his confidence seemed to be faltering under the Duca's glacial stare. Is it? Maxwell replied. A single silken question. He turned his gaze on Lady Trowbridge. And you, my lady? You seem to have taken a keen interest in Miss Rowan's welfare. And in mine? Lady Trowbridge fluttered a hand to her chest. I was merely trying to be a friend to the poor girl, Your Grace, and to protect you from her deceptions. Your deceptions, you mean? The words hung in the air, sharp and deadly. He walked over to a small writing desk and from his inner pocket produced a sheaf of papers tied with a ribbon. You see, Lady Trowbridge, I am the man who notices things. I noticed your particular interest in my affairs. I noticed the way your supposed friendship with Miss Rowan always seemed to involve steering her toward public scrutiny, and so I had my solicitor make some inquiries. Not just into Miss Rowan's dismissal matter we had already begun to investigate, per my arrangement with her, but into you. Lady Trowbridge's face went white. Maxwell untied the ribbon. You have a nephew, do you not? A Mr. Fitzwilliam, a man with significant gambling debts, a man you had hoped to see married to a great fortune, my fortune, perhaps? He let the question hang in the air. You saw Miss Rowan not as a friend, but as an obstacle. A quiet, unassuming woman you believed you could easily discredit when the time was right. You cultivated her trust, all the while plotting her downfall. This is outrageous, Lady Trowbridge gasped. But there was no conviction in her voice, only rising panic. Ada Maxwell said again. He turned his attention back to Thomas, holding up a single sheet of paper. Now, as to your claim, Mr. Altrincham, I am a man who believes in evidence, and while your word may be enough for your mother, it is not enough for me. He began to read from the paper, his voice clear and cutting. My dearest Harry, You will not believe my luck. The dragon of a governess is finally gone. I told Mother she was making eyes at me, and the old bat believed it hook, line, and sinker. Shay's been packed off in disgrace. No more Latin verbs for me. I shall be back in London in a fortnight, and we shall have the time of our lives. Burn this letter, as usual. Your friend, Tom. Thomas Altrincham looked as if he had been struck by lightning. He stared at the letter, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. The letter was not burned. Maxwell stated calmly. Your friend Harry, it seems, has his own debts. And my solicitor is a very persuasive man. A choked sound came from Viscountess Altrincham. She stared at her son, her face a mask of dawning horror and fury. The entire sordid lie was laid bare. Her, Sona's casual cruelty, his foolish pride, had brought this humiliation upon them. Lady Trowbridge sank into a chair, her face a ruin. Her careful, intricate scheme had not just failed. It had been dismantled, piece by piece, by the one man she had underestimated. She had seen the cold Duke, the grieving widower. She had not seen the man who noticed everything, the man who protected what was his with a ruthless surgical precision. The room was silent, save for the Viscountess's ragged breathing. The social execution was complete. Lady Trowbridge was not ruined financially, but her social currency, the only thing she truly valued, had just been rendered worthless. No one would ever trust her again. Maxwell looked at the Duke of Abernethy, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide, astonished eyes. I believe Lady Trowbridge is feeling unwell. Perhaps she should be shown to her carriage. Abernethy nodded dumbly and gestured to a footman. Lady Trowbridge was helped from the room. A broken, defeated woman, her public life was over. But Maxwell was not finished. He turned back to the room, his gaze sweeping over the Altrinchams, who seemed to have shrunk into their fine clothes. He then walked to the door and opened it. The entire ballroom seemed to be crowded into the hallway, their faces a sea of avid curiosity. He drew himself up to his full ducal height, his voice ringing out with an authority that silenced every last whisper. Beatrice rose and came to stand beside him, no longer hiding behind his coat, but standing as his equal. She held her head high, her gaze clear and steady. For those of you who witnessed the disgraceful scene earlier, Maxwell announced, his voice carrying to the farthest corner of the hall, let me be perfectly clear. The accusations made against Miss Beatrice Rowan were a malicious and calculated lie. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. A lie concocted by a desperate woman and a foolish boy. I have the evidence to prove it. Miss Rowan's integrity is beyond question. She is a woman of more honor, courage, and character than any person in this room. He then took Beatrice's hand in his, raising it to his lips. It was a gesture of profound respect, a public act of fealty. And it is my very great honor, he declared, his eyes finding hers, a world of unspoken emotion passing between them, to announce my engagement to her. He had not just defended her. He had not just cleared her name. He had chosen her. Publicly. Definitively. He had bound himself to her in front of the very people who had sought to destroy her. Beatrice felt a dizzying wave of relief, and something else, something she dared not name, hope. She had not been saved, she had been vindicated. She stood beside him, not as a rescued damsel, but as a queen beside her king. Having weathered the battle together, she had claimed her place, not through marriage, but through truth. The bargain was sealed, not with ink and paper, but here, in the crucible of public opinion, forged in fire and loyalty. The murmuring of the crowd began to change, from scandal to awe. They had witnessed not just the fall of a schemer, but the rise of a duchess. The journey back to the Duke's townhouse was as silent as the one to Grimsby had been, but this silence was of a different quality. It was not empty. It was charged heavy with the aftermath of the battle they had just won. Beatrice sat wrapped in his coat, the warmth of it seeping into her bones, chasing away the last of the chill from the ballroom. She could still feel the pressure of his lips on her hand, the unwavering strength of his grip. They were shown into the library, a smaller, more intimate version of the one at Grimsby. A fire burned in the hearth, real and welcoming. The butler, recognizing the gravity of the evening, had left a decanter of brandy and 2 glasses on a silver tray before quietly withdrawing. The adrenaline of the confrontation began to fade, leaving Beatrice feeling strangely fragile. The full weight of Lady Trowbridge's betrayal settled upon her. She had thought she had a friend. The thought was a sharp, painful ache in her chest. Maxwell seemed to sense it. He did not speak, but moved to the fireplace, his broad back to her as he stared into the flames. He was pacing, not with his feet, but with the restless energy that radiated from him. He was a caged tiger, the fury of the evening still thrumming just beneath his controlled surface. Finally, he turned to face her. His face, in the flickering firelight, was stripped of its ducal mask. He looked younger, more vulnerable, and utterly exhausted. Beatrice," he began, his voice rough. "I am sorry I brought you into this. I exposed you to the day of venom. You did not," she said, her own voice quiet, but firm. Lady Trowbridge did. You defended me. You believed me. Of course I believed you," he said, a look of astonishment on his face, as if any other course of action were inconceivable. He took a step towards her. "When I saw you standing there, with their lies raining down on you, I have never in my life felt such a rage. I wanted to tear them apart with my bare hands." The raw violence of the admission shocked her. This was the man beneath the ice. A man of deep, dangerous passions, held in check by a will of iron. I told myself this was a contract," he continued, his voice dropping low, wrestling with the words, business arrangement. "I told myself I needed a duchess to satisfy a clause in a will, a signature on a document. I built a fortress of logic and practicality around it, so I would not have to feel anything." He paced to the window, staring out at the dark sleeping square. My father taught me that love makes a man weep. When Eleanor died, the pain of it almost destroyed me. It almost destroyed Grimsby, and I swore I would never allow myself to be that vulnerable again. I would be a duke, a title, a set of duties. Nothing more. He turned back to her, his eyes burning with an intensity that took her breath away. "And then you came. You walked into my cold, empty house, and you did not try to fill my wife's place. You did not try to flatter me or charm me. You simply you were honest. You were capable. You were kind. You opened the curtains. You baked bread. You tended to a servanta's torn apron. You walked into Grimsby, and you let the light in." He crossed the room in 2 long strides and stopped before her, so close she could feel the heat from his body. The truth is, Beatrice," he confessed, his voice ragged with the cost of the admission, "I didn't just need a duchess. I needed you. You, Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The precipice. She had to be sure. She had to know that this was not just the aftermath of a shared battle, not just gratitude for her help in saving his estate. Do not say it if it is only gratitude," she whispered. The words a shield against a hope too terrifying to embrace. Do not say it because you feel you owe me for clearing my name." He reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. His thumbs stroked her cheeks, wiping away tears she had not even realized she'd shed a gratitude. He said, his voice thick with emotion, "Is what I feel for my solicitor. It is a neat, orderly emotion. What I feel for you, Beatrice, is chaos. It is terror." She looked at him, confused. "A terror?" The terror of realizing that I cannot imagine that house without you in it," he said, his gaze raw and open. The terror of understanding that if you had walked away tonight, Grimsby Hall would not just be a cold house again. It would be a tomb, my tomb, You did not just restore my home. You resurrected its master. He lowered his head and his lips met hers. It was not a practiced, polished kiss. It was a kiss of desperate honesty, of years of pent-up loneliness, and a dawning, terrifying love. It was clumsy and urgent and profoundly true. It was the sealing of a bargain that had nothing to do with contracts and everything to do with two broken, lonely souls finding their counterpart. In the quiet of the firelit library, Beatrice Rowan, the dismissed governess, the overlooked librarian, finally, truly, came home. 6 months later, spring had come to Grimsby Hall. It was not just in the daffodils that now bloomed in bright, cheerful swaths along the drive, or in the tender green leaves unfurling on the ancient oaks. It was in the house itself. The heavy velvet curtains had been replaced with lighter fabrics that let the sunlight flood the long corridors. The sound of footsteps, and even occasionally laughter, echoed in the once silent halls. The air smelled of beeswax and lemon polish, and the constant comforting scent of baking from the kitchens. Grimsby Hall was alive. Beatrice, now the Duchess of Grimsby, stood in the morning room arranging a bouquet of pale pink roses from the newly revived gardens. She had found her rhythm here, not as a replacement for the woman who came before, but as a new and vital presence. The portrait of Eleanor, the first Duchess, still hung in its place of honor in the gallery. Her rooms remained untouched, a quiet memorial to a love that was past. Beatrice had insisted on it. The household had learned that honoring the past and embracing the present were not mutually exclusive. Maxwell came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his gaze on her hands as she deftly placed a final rose into the vase. He no longer looked like the cold, severe Duke she had first met in the library. The lines of tension around his eyes and mouth had softened. He smiled, now a slow, rare, but genuine expression that was reserved only for her. The trustees are beside themselves," he murmured into her ear. The estate is not only solvent, it is turning a profit for the first time in a decade." "They think I am a financial genius," Beatrice smiled. What do you tell them?" "Why tell them my wife is a genius with a ledger," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Which is the truth?" They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the spring sunlight dapple the lawn outside. The ghosts of Grimsby Hall had not been banished, they had simply been given peace. Later that day, they were in the observatory. It had become their sanctuary, a quiet space above the world where they could simply be Maxwell and Beatrice. The great telescope was no longer a monument to grief, but a shared passion. He had taught her the constellations, his voice low and patient as he pointed out Andromeda and Orion, sharing the stories his wife had once loved. He spoke of Eleanor, now without the sharp edge of pain, but with a gentle, wistful affection. Beatrice listened, understanding that his love for his late wife did not diminish his love for her. It was simply a different chapter in the story of his heart. "A was so afraid," he confessed one evening, his arms securely around her as they looked out at the star-dusted sky. "A afraid of feeling anything again. I thought duty was a safer harbor than love. And now?" she asked softly. Now I know that a harbor is no place for a ship to stay," he said. Its purpose is to venture out onto the sea." He turned to her, his expression serious. You are my sea, Beatrice. My adventure." Their life settled into a rhythm of quiet joys. The management of the estate was a shared partnership. The restoration of the house was a shared project. Their evenings were spent in the library, reading by the fire, or in the observatory, charting the heavens. One afternoon, a letter arrived, bearing the crest of the Duke of Abernethy. It was an invitation to another ball. Beatrice felt a flicker of the old apprehension. Maxwell saw it in her eyes. He took the invitation from her hand and without a word tossed it into the fire. "We are not required to perform for them anymore," he said simply. He took her hand. "Our life is here that evening, As she was preparing for bed, she found him standing by the window of their chamber, looking out at the moonlit grounds. She came and stood beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He was silent for a moment. "I was thinking about the first day I saw you," he said. In the library. You were so composed, so self-contained. Everyone else in that town was performing, jostling for position, desperate to be noticed. And you were just there. Real. You did not need saving. No, she agreed softly. I did not. He turned to her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. His eyes were dark with an emotion so deep it made her heart ache. A was the one who needed help, he said, his voice thick with the memory of his own desperation. A was the one who was drowning. She had come to his house as part of a bargain, a woman hired to play a role. She had come to a place of coldness and grief, a house holding its breath. She had been tested and betrayed, her deepest wounds laid bare for the world to see, but she had endured. And in the end, she had not been a replacement, nor a convenience, nor a solution to a problem. She became the woman who stayed. And in staying, she had saved a kingdom, resurrected a duke, and found her own true home.